on ChatGPT 5. I'm done, AI coach, have now trained over the past 2 years over 1,000 leaders, companies including Google, Microsoft, Amazon, Toyota, GSK, McKinsey, and more. Really focus today on guiding you through the key things that I see people do when they're trying to kind of go from using AI just a bit into using AI very extensively as an AI leader. Some of the AI leaders that we've trained are here. So if you have any questions, you can put it in the chat and then they can answer it as well. The two key things that we do, besides writing a newsletter to over 30,000 people twice per week, are the bootcamp. We're starting one again on Friday. This is basically where we take especially non-technical leaders through kind of like all the things that are required to be confidently leading companies or teams in the age of AI. It's partially on-demand lessons, it's partially live sessions. And then we do a kind of certification program where we support extensively on actually implementing AI, because I think AI is great to learn and great to know about, but the real value is going to come from actually using it hands-on. And now we've moved into that in that way of working, and we have now people walking away with at least 5 assistants that they've built. So that's a lot more interesting. And then the second part that we do is run a community over 400 senior leaders. We have live classes every other Thursday, because even if you have finished that bootcamp or you've educated yourself, AI is running so fast. There's so many developments. It's very hard to keep up. So we're using that membership to keep everyone up to date. And we have a team of researchers and creators to keep you ahead. So to answer the question up front that probably most people will ask is, will we have slides and recording? Answer, yes. Okay, with that said, what I usually hear from people who are not yet tapping AI fully is that they're kind of feeling that there is probably a lot of potential in using AI, but they're just hearing too many things about too many platforms and too many tips and tricks and techniques, and just generally feel quite overwhelmed. And that's kind of why we get to this theme of, we're just scratching the surface. It kind of feels like no matter what we do, we're never really getting to the point where we feel like we really grasp AI. And obviously, I'm very curious about your particular challenge. So if you have something like specifically that you're working on, that you're trying to solve, would love to see that in the chat as we dive into the material, because then we can look back at the end and see, is what we just covered, is that going to kind of answer some of the bigger challenges? So if you could just share in the chat, kind of like when you're thinking about this whole AI thing, kind of like your stage and like the biggest challenge that you're facing right now in making the most out of AI, I will be the first one to share. I think for me, it's exactly the same, even though we do this full time. It's just the difficulty of staying up to date, understanding really in detail everything that's going on, and then especially translating that into, now, how do I actually use it, right? So I hear about all of these capabilities and these opportunities, but then I kind of like next day just go to work and just do my work in not quite the way we did it maybe a few years ago, but it doesn't really seem to impact always like so directly in everything that we do. That's my biggest challenge, is to kind of like stay ahead and really translate it into what's effective for the way that we work. So then what I'll take you through in the next like 40 minutes or so is these 5 key shifts that I see, again, the difference between people who are kind of just dabbling with AI, kind of scratching the surface, to being really confident in leading with AI. I'll show you some real examples of the workflows that you can do and that you can copy, especially from graduates. And then I will highlight ChatGPT 5, because we did this maybe like a month and a half ago or so. And this is obviously like the big new thing is ChatGPT 5. So I'll also kind of highlight how, again, in that theme of it's always evolving, it's hard to keep up, like where that is kind of like building in some new layers of almost making it even more difficult, ironically, to get value out of AI. So I'll just do a short preamble. Some people here will have heard it. But this is the story of the era of AI leadership. And I do think, I think even if you just like read a magazine like HBR, you know, used to be quite a diverse set of topics. Now it's like 9 out of 10 articles is about AI. It is kind of the big defining topic of probably at least this year and next year. We need to change how we work on so many different fronts, right? Because it's not just kind of like in our personal work, we can talk about productivity, but it's also in like, what does our product look like? What does our service look like? What does our go to market look like? What does customer service look like, right? How do we lead our teams? How do we lead people? How do we lead hybrid teams of people and AIs, AI agents, AI assistants? So there really is like a very different kind of era that we're in. And then every time, again, going back to that same point, every time we feel like we've kind of mastered it, or we kind of like we're there, there's a new AI evolution that kind of makes us go back to, oh, we're lost again. Right. So I kind of have this timeline again. Some of you will have seen this, but 3 years ago was very simple. Even though ChatGPT and AI, generative AI, was very new, in a way, it was very simple. It was basically just you typed something, AI typed something back, which is great, right? And it could help you with some content writing and maybe a little bit of brainstorming. Then, especially last year, we really got this like new wave of AI, which was multimodal. So meaning you can talk to it, it talks back to you, it can generate images, it can generate video. And now we're at this stage where it's all about agentic AI, right? So this is AI that can autonomously do the work. So you can now, with one prompt, these are just a couple of examples, right? But and most of you may have seen this, but with one prompt, you can go to an AI and generate like a full-on video. Like this would have been unheard of just 2 years ago, right? Like you can generate a video, you can generate infographics, social content. You can use an agentic tool like Manus to review resumes and let the agent build you a ranking of all the candidates. You can use another agentic tool called Lovable, and some of you have used it to build an entire app or website. We'll look at that in just a little bit. you know, so much is possible, but at the end of the day, it still comes back to you as a leader, no matter kind of like what your direct purview is, still comes back to you and to say, who is going to manage all of that? So it's great that you can do all these things with just one prompt, but someone has to send that prompt, right? Someone has to come up with that prompt. So Josh Persin, lifelong Deloitte consultant, eventually started his own practice. He calls it the super worker, right? He says that the people who are super workers, they are individuals who are using AI to dramatically enhance their productivity, their performance, their creativity. That's the part that I really like, right? The co-founder of Anthropic, the makers of Cloud, calls it manager nerds. But again, it's this idea that suddenly we have to think about how to lead these AIs, right? And again, whether you call it manager nerds or you call it super workers, I call them AI leaders, right? It goes to this idea that you got to now build, besides a team of people around you, you got to build a team of AIs around you, right? That's really the big shift. You're going from just working with either yourself or a group of people to working with these AIs. And the research is now showing that that is more effective, right? This is a study from Ethan Mollick together with P&G, and they've basically shown that one individual with an AI tool outperforms even a team of people, right? So AI makes people very, very powerful. And that's why also you see now in hiring, if you're looking for a job, right? 81% of hiring managers are now prioritizing people with AI related skills. In fact, I did some interviews earlier today. And I have to ask about how are you using AI in your role? And they were talking about Gemini. So then have you created a gem? And how do you actually use that? And when do you update it, right? It's a very different way of working and leading. And that's why you now also see companies like Shopify. Tobias Lutke, the CEO, says, look, guys, you've heard me talk about, right, to his internal team, you've heard me talk about AI, right? I talked about it in videos, podcasts, town halls. And I said, no, everyone should be tinkering with AI. That was their big theme for last year. Everyone should be tinkering with AI. But he's like, that was just too mild. That was more like a suggestion, right? Now they're saying it's a baseline expectation. Not only are we going to put it into performance reviews, but also if you want to hire someone, you have to demonstrate why you wouldn't be able to do that with AI. So that's a very different, again, very different world. And that's where AI leaders are becoming a lot more important, right? This is almost becoming in that language, becoming a baseline expectation that you know how to manage an AI team. So I'll take you through the biggest shifts, and again, updated with GPT-5 because I see that like changing things quite a bit. The biggest shifts in going from just being interested in AI to confidently leading with AI. The first one really is around prompting. Okay, we are all prompting AI, right? But we're seeing people still kind of using pretty generic prompts, which mean that you're reprompting endlessly, which means that you don't really get the best results. And where we see the difference in graduated AI leaders is that they're really treating AI as a new colleague, and not just one colleague, right? They're also using it as a team of AI assistants, AI employees to do all of the work that's relevant to AI. That's the second big shift, right? Not just using it once every now and then as like a specialist tool, but basically making this the default way of working. The third one is moving from, I see this all the time, right? People still talk about AI as a productivity tool, but the real value of AI is not in productivity, it's really in your capability. It's in doing more than you were able to do before, not in terms of like how much of the same thing, but new things that you weren't doing before. And that extends even into something like not just taking something off the shelf, but actually thinking about, okay, can I sort of mold the AI into something that's really tailored to my work? So that's another like really big difference between people who are kind of just using AI as it comes out of the box and people are really understanding it and therefore deeply tailoring it to their work. And the final one, and this is getting into like the most advanced stage of AI, is moving from using AI as a tool to having AI execute while you supervise. So AI is actually doing the work. So I'll dive into those 5 teams and I'll show you some tools and trips and techniques along the way. The first one really about prompting. So everything we talk about always comes back to prompting, even when you're using very kind of advanced software or advanced platforms, because at the end of the day, it's always a prompt into an AI system, into an LLM, right? So if you're just using a generic prompt, you typically get very generic outcome. So I wrote a couple of weeks ago, it's very annoying when I hear that people say, oh, AI creates such generic content. It's like, well, then you're just not prompting it specifically enough, right? Because AI is literally, all the human knowledge in the world combined. So it definitely knows more than any individual, and therefore it could create really, really good content, right? The key principle, and some of you will have heard this, is that good prompting is just good delegation, meaning that like if you would have to train a new employee on a certain type of work, on a workflow, on something that you were doing before, then you were delegating. And that's how you need to think about AI, right? AI not as a piece of technology, but AI as a coworker, as a colleague. So in order to get the most out of that colleague, that very smart, capable colleague, you got to delegate really well. If you give a very bad prompt, the output will be terrible as well, right? So we have a framework called Kodu Super Prompt. And it's really, really simple, but it really covers all the key things that you need for an AI to be able to do really good work for you. The first one is the character. Because AI has absorbed all the knowledge in the world, you actually need to start by defining who AI is supposed to be in this particular interaction. We'll talk about GPTs a little bit later, but that's where that really comes into play. And that's also why you see things like you are an experienced copywriter, you are an award-winning chief of staff, right? Because by saying that, AI will not be so pleasing and just doing everything that you say it to do, because you're telling it basically you're better than me, right? So imagine that this is someone who is better at that particular task than you are, so that you get an output that's better than what you would have created, right? Number two is the objective, not so much like the thing that you're trying to get created, but the thing that you're trying to get done, right? So what's the end outcome that you're looking for? That's really what you want to brief AI on. Then do's and don'ts, we'll talk about it in detail on ChatGPT 5, but very specifically around what does good work look like? And then how would I normally do it, right? Because in delegation, if you would explain for the first time a particular workflow or how you would normally do it, you would start by saying, well, here's what I've learned over the past few years in doing this kind of work, in creating these research reports, for example, and writing these annual letters, right? I would not do this, but I would do this, right? So that's also important to define. And then finally, the output. And this is basically where the saying of a picture is 1,000 words. That's definitely the case with AI. If you can show an example of what the end output looks like, you get a lot better results because instead of having to describe it in a lot of detail, you're showing it what it's supposed to create. And so this is an example from one of our graduates. This is from Abhishek Ratti, who is a senior executive at Chubb, like a really big life insurance company based out of Singapore, where he's located. And he's basically saying, his original prompt, because we told people dig into your existing prompts and let's workshop those prompts right into a super prompt. And the original prompt was still pretty good, right? It's like, hey, AI, I'm considering launching a Gen AI masterclass for insurance agents. Please generate a list of topics. I mean, that's a pretty straight up prompt, right? You would kind of like get, you kind of get the idea of what we're doing here. Then we said, okay, now rewrite that. And we have, as you can see on the left-hand side here, just like a little AI that does the rewriting for you. But let's rewrite that with these things in mind, right? So now we're starting with a character. Imagine that you are a thought leader in insurance and also in Gen AI and right? And I need you to do this. And I need you to make sure that this, and you need to output it in this particular format. And then we do the extra layer on it. We say, okay, that was already quite good. How could we now make it even better? And that's where we say, let's ask AI, how could we make this prompt even better? And now we're basically seeing in that second version a much better version of the prompt than we saw in the beginning. And that leads to way better outcomes, right? So that's how you move from a very simple prompt into a prompt that actually gets you to the kind of result that you need without having to constantly reprompt. So this is I would call it the old world, the world before ChatGPT 5, right? Then ChatGPT 5 came out now a week and a half ago. We haven't slept since because there's so much to update. One of the really interesting insights here is that GPT-5 compared to 4.0, which was the big model launch before 5 came around, is that GPT-5 is very steerable. This is from someone on the Cursor team. Cursor is an app to basically vibe code your own apps or have some AI assistance in coding. And he's saying GPT-5 is one of the most steerable models that I've used. So what he realized is that he needed to be more explicit about what he was trying to accomplish for some tasks. Leaving certain things vague ended up with the model taking a very different direction than I expected. When I was more specific, I was surprised by how smart the model was. So we saw in our community, and this is sort of, again, half therapy, half AI education, right? A lot of people that said all the prompts that I was using, even super prompts I was using that I maybe have put in my GPTs, I'm getting really bad outputs in ChatGPT 5. And what it really comes down to is that the prompts still were not specific enough. And this is especially true if you're doing the kind of prompting where you basically, kind of just open up your phone and maybe use voice mode to just kind of ramble for 20 minutes and then have the AI make sense of it, right? GPT-5 is really closely listening. It's a rule follower, as Sam Altman said, it's a rule follower, but therefore also if you have things that kind of contradict each other, you get very bad outputs. So we've kind of analyzed this model, right? We look at all the developer documentation, we look at everything that's available on how ChatGPT 5 works. The first big thing to understand is that whenever you're talking to, assuming that most of you will at least use ChatGPT every now and then, whenever you're talking to ChatGPT 5, you're not really talking to just one model, which 4.0, the previous model, you were just talking to 4.0. You're basically talking to kind of like a middle manager, ChatGPT 5, or ChatGPT calls it the router, but you're kind of talking to kind of like a traffic controller who takes your prompt and then decides to which actual model to throw it. There's a bunch of models under ChatGPT 5. And the ones that are really shown to users are the chat mode, which is kind of fast responses, and the thinking mode, which is kind of deliberate. And the router, the traffic controller, the middle manager, basically decides where to send it to. If you're not aware of that, you may sometimes get a really good reply from ChatGPT and sometimes a really poor one. It's basically because it's sending it to the wrong model, the wrong submodel, or the wrong mode, as they call it. Besides that, you also have now some new changes in the sense that ChatGPT 5 is optimized here, the second bubble here, for a particular couple of cases, especially writing, coding, and very unexpectedly health. The third key change in GPT-5 is that it's a lot less hallucinatory. So it's making up less facts. It's also more keen to say, I don't know something when it doesn't know something. That's another big change. It's better at multimodal capabilities, which we talked about before. It has a larger context window, which we will not get into today. Most of the graduates will know it. And it's better at researching, and it's also a lot more proactive. It will kind of keep suggesting next steps. And they're trying to make it more personalized, right? They've learned from the 4.0 kind of fallout that people were quite tight. They were quite, they quite built a relationship with ChatGPT 4.0. So they've said, okay, we actually want you to choose a personality and really fine tune it. So now when you go into your settings of ChatGPT 5, you can choose a personality, the cynic, the robot, the listener, the nerd. I chose the nerd. And you can write really detailed instructions that basically are pre-prompted every single time you prompt ChatGPT 5. So now let's talk briefly about prompting, and you're going to get these slides, so you have the whole framework. But these are the key things that you now need on top of that super prompt that you now need to define if you want to get the right output. The first one is going back to those like two sub modes is the fast versus thorough. So if you know that ChatGPT is basically deciding which model is going to take your question, you may sometimes want to force it to send it to the quick model and sometimes force it to send it to the deep model. The full framework has all the detail. The second one is that it's primed to be really eager to use a lot of tools. So ChatGPT has a lot of tools, like maybe you don't even know them, but under the hood, it has web search capability. It has file analysis. It can analyze images. It has a lot of tools, and it's really primed to use those tools to do a lot of work for you. And sometimes you may want that. Sometimes you may not want that. So you may want to define in your prompt specifically how many tools it should use, when it should work autonomously, but also where it should stop. And that goes back also to the theme of you need to be more explicit. So you want to be really prescriptive in how AI handles your project. The final, once again, you get the full framework, is really around how often it should update you. Maybe it should share a plan ahead of time. These are things that you can now prompt the model and it will do it. And you can also find a better balance between maybe you want still a short summary output, but not shallow thinking. So this is now something that you can decide, because under the hood, those are now two different settings. And you need to really think about, again, how much context you feed it, because even though it's a very capable model, it is very precise and rule following. So if you give it too much information, it could get overwhelmed, kind of short circuit and give you the wrong output. I see some questions. I'll handle those kind of in the overflow after we've gone through the 5 shifts. You just want to make sure that we get through this material at least. So the first really big thing is, again, really moving towards this idea of like AI or ChatGPT is like a website I go to, an app I open. Start to think about it as, again, as a colleague, as almost like as a human colleague, and think about the amount of time and patience that you would invest in a human to finally understand how you would do your work. Because the moment that you make that investment, it will pay back tenfold, again, as the data is showing. The second one is kind of an extension of that, which is that the people that are really mastering AI, they're moving from using it every now and then for one particular purpose to, oh, now I see. Now that I'm doing all of these exercises, I'm basically being forced to implement AI. I now realized that there are so many more opportunities to use AI than I thought before. But one really big trap that you can get into, and if you've seen ads or people are mentioning, or your inbox is overflowing with all these kind of AI tools that are out there, the really important thing is to actually start not so much with what can the technology do or what can all the different tools do, but really starts with the work. So this, again, is just delegation or automation, where it starts with understanding what of your work AI is really good at doing, and then finding an AI to do that. Because if it's for a task that previously you were not doing and you had no interest in doing, or if it's for something that you only spend 1 hour a month on, it's not worth investing in a platform, learning it, maybe even paying something for it. So that's why we always say we start with the task. We don't start with the tools, right? And in tasks, you really want to analyze all the things that you're spending your time on, and then finding within that the tasks that are general, error-friendly, and digital, We have more detailed material on this, but this is where AI shines. If a task is general, is error-friendly, and is digital, AI can likely do it or at least collaborate with you on it. So this is an example of an executive that went through that exercise. And on the right-hand side, you see a custom GPT that we've built. We use the reasoning model to have a brainstorm with you on what are you doing in your work. You could send me a screenshot of your calendar. It's fully confidential, fully private. You could send me a list of tasks. You could let me maybe like even look at like the type of conversation that you have very often. And then I can brainstorm with you where most likely AI is immediately going to make the biggest impact. And so the example here is from Christine Kastoulis out of the UK. Senior retail executives have spent a lot of time with Sainsbury's, one of the biggest retail chains there. And she used this GPT, but again, you can have that brainstorm without using the GPT. Use the GPT to brainstorm on, well, look, here's what my work looks like. Here's where I'm spending all of my time. Where could AI really impact me the most? So that we start where it matters, where we get the biggest benefit, right? And so for her, it was things like underlined here, complete research on competitors and retail industry trends, right? You could imagine that someone in a role like that, like very senior leader in the retail space, would spend a lot of time researching, right? A lot of time researching. And then because she identified it as one of her use cases, she then found Notebook LM. And, we go through about 30 tools. She then found Notebook LM, which really was super helpful for her to be that research assistant, right? The other one is that she's kind of like shifting now to a new role, and she's actually spending a lot of time preparing for interviews, right? Like trying to kind of tailor the elevator pitch to the particular role. Oh, that's another thing where ChatGPT can be super good, right? You just give it a JD and you say, look, here's who I am. Now bring those two together so that I have a good pitch to open that call. But also you can use something like ChatGPT voice mode for practicing the interview, right? So it can act as the interviewer and ask you the questions and even give you some feedback. So a very practical example of, again, how you can use AI in probably in much more than you think, but also where it's really important to limit yourself so that you don't go sign up for any AI platform out there because it can do all of these things, but that you stay really focused to where AI is going to be the most impactful. The third one is around not so much AI as a productivity tool, even though that's obviously very important, but as you've already seen some of the examples until now of real executives, right, workshopping how they lead by implementing AI, it's not just about doing the same things that you were already doing faster, but it's really expanding your capabilities, right? So right now with again, even just your standard ChatGPT account, or this could be on Gemini or on Copilot offers it too, Perplexity has one, you can be a world-class researcher, right? You can use a tool like ChatGPT Deep Research or Perplexity Deep Research or the Microsoft AI Copilot Researcher to do deep dive researches and create like 30, 40 page reports on topics that you didn't know anything about. Right now, we can all Google search. I'm not saying we don't know how to research, but right, that deep level of researching, pulling like 100+ sources and making sense of it, right? That would have taken us so much time if we were even kind of like capable of that or really primed to do that. Now you can have an AI do that, right? If you discover a tool like Gamma or even like Copilot for PowerPoint to a degree, you can now be a pro in designing presentations. I use this all the time, including for this presentation, right? Even though I use Google Slides, it's still very helpful to have a separate AI to do something I'm actually really not good at, which is to nicely format slides. And again, Gamma is really good at that, right? You can also do something like, oh, I see it's even a video. I thought it was just a static. You can even create an AI avatar of yourself and then basically prompts yourself to say things that could be just like a short video. It could be a walkthrough of a deck like we have here. Now, again, these are things that you would really not think about as just your typical thing to do with AI, but they can be really, really, really powerful, right? So now we have here another example, right? This is from Kristen Cuneo, who is previously was the L&D leader at X. By the way, one of the coolest companies in the world. Not X, the Twitter platform. X, the Moonshot Factory, which is a sister company of Google. It's basically Alphabet's innovation arm. So she just graduated last week. And in her showcase at the end, she showed how she was launching her own blog called Speaking Spanish-ish, which is wonderfully creative. And basically said, look, I don't want to use stock images. I want to have a very own defined style. So I'm going to put a couple of image generators against each other. Image generation is one of the things that we look at in the bootcamp. I'm going to put a couple of image generators against each other and see which one creates the best images for me. The really cool thing is that she didn't try it directly on the topic of the blog, but she actually did it on chinchillas learning about dust baths. And out of the four, and you can cast your own vote, she liked the ChatGPT 4 one the most. And it actually looks quite good, right? Like one larger chinchilla teaching the other chinchillas about dust baths. And then she basically selected it and then created a custom GPT to be a photography creator for her blog that is completely primed on what she is looking for the style of photos. So the other two that you see here are stock images, but the one on the left is fully AI generated, but completely tailored to her particular use case. And again, those are just some of the tools that we go through. Again, the tools are not really important, but the fact that you can now do all of these things that you couldn't do before is. Now, again, I said before, and I'll say it probably like a few more times, I think there's a huge risk in getting too deep into all the tools and all that's possible, especially when it's not just you, but it's your team of 10, a team of 20, right? Some of the people that I've coached have tens of thousands of people working for them. And so if they make a decision to implement an AI platform, there is a huge cost associated with it, right? And it's not just the cost of the $10 or $20 per month that the tool costs, but also what is the potential of, let's say, a data breach? What happens if this vendor cannot grow with you, right? There's all kinds of things to think about. So we have a matrix called the AI Investment Attractiveness Matrix, the AI Squared Matrix, where we go through the tools that you're thinking of implementing and whether they make sense or not. So that's something that's really important to keep in mind. And again, just an exercise very much worth running. You get the slide, so you have that framework too. Okay, moving towards the end, the fourth big shift that I really see when people move from kind of just getting introduced to AI to using it very proactively in the way that they lead, in the way that they work, is moving from just taking a platform or an AI tool off the shelf and really tweaking it towards their own needs. So Kristen's was actually a really good example of that. But we're getting here to the point where it's not just about, again, I could use Grammarly to write better. I could use Otter to take notes on my meetings, but there's going to be some instances where that's just not going to cut it, right? Where I need something that's way more personalized. So in ChatGPT, you can create a GPT. So if you're on the Plus plan, you can actually define in your GPT whether it should be using the regular fast model or whether it should be the thinking model in ChatGPT 5. But you can now create a GPT, which is sort of a customized version of ChatGPT. It's helping you with one particular task, which means that every single time you call them into your office or you call them to work to do a job, it already has been pre-prompted with all of the information it needs to do that job. So it's basically the combination of the super prompt with those additional kind of details of the ChatGPT 5 model that the model needs to create really good outputs, like how many tools should I use, how long should I research for, etc., and maybe some additional knowledge. So you could upload some knowledge. The example here is Brit. Brit actually did something really funny. So Britt Lingwist is a business development director at a leading real estate company in Sweden. She actually named all of her AI colleagues. So this one is called Anna, and they're all named after people that inspired her, which is even cooler. So she created an AI specifically as a sparring partner. So if you ever feel like AI just agrees with you too much, again, whether you use ChatGPT or Gemini or Copilot, any of the other ones, if you feel like it's kind of agreeing with you too much, if you feel like it's not, really challenging you enough, you got to remember that this is a platform that has 700 million active users, right? It's not built to be a business assistant, right? Most people are using it. Well, first of all, mostly it's students using it to do their homework. But most people are using it for very mundane day-to-day tasks. And probably part of how you're using it is in that realm. So it's not out of the box a business assistant. It's not out of the box a deep thinking, right? Kind of like chief of staff level help. So you got to pre-prompt it, right? And so she basically created a custom GPT where she says, every single time I call this GPT, It is supporting me in thinking strategically and creatively about business development, client offerings, and communication. The AI helps me sharpen ideas, explore market relevant perspectives, and create high quality content and proposals. So now instead of every time having to prompt an AI kind of individually, separately, she can now do it in one breath because she created that GPT. It's very easy to create. Again, you can do it on Gemini, it's called a gem. You can do it on Copilot, it's called an agent. Very easy to do. But one of those things where, again, I really see the difference between someone who is just kind of tapping to AI, including the person I interviewed earlier today, versus someone who really understands how to strategically use this as, again, a set of co-workers that are doing all kinds of specific things for them. The more, the deeper that you go on the thing that you need to do, the better the output. And the final one, and this is thankfully, finally, we get to the place where we are not just using AI as a tool where we are, constantly delegating and inputting and prompting. We finally have now an AI that can do the work for us. So this is from early last year when OpenAI said, look, we kind of see a couple of stages of artificial intelligence kind of towards this point where AI can do anything that we do on a computer. We're going to start with chatbots, right, which at that point was already launched. Then we have reasoners who can problem solve almost at human level. Now, that is also something that we have already seen. We had that in the previous, it was called the O3 model. Now it's embedded in ChatGPT 5. So now a lot more people are using kind of AI to really solve problems. And then the third level, which at that point they said sometime in the future, we will have agents, they are now here. So agents basically just means that the AI autonomously does the work. So you say, look, I want a certain outcome. The example you see here is of ChatGPT agent. You just say, I want a certain outcome. And then the agent can decide, well, in order to get to that outcome, which sources should I use? Which, in this case, Google searches should I do? Which website should I open? And then it can actually go on and open that website for you, navigate the website as a person. It can create, as you see here, an Excel sheet with all of the data. So previously this was available through platforms like GenSpark and Manus, but now ChatGPT can do it natively. So if you're on the Plus plan or above, you can now use Agent in tandem with ChatGPT 5, and you can really have AI basically break out of the box of just chatting and going to do work for you. And if the next slide will open, you now also see this with, I mentioned this really early on, you also see this with tools like Lovable. Lovable, also out of Sweden, like Brit that we mentioned earlier, can now with one prompt build an entire website or app. So our final day, just to kind of keep things fun, we vibe code something. So, you just come up with an idea for an app or a website and we create it together. And actually, in this case, we have a great example because Anushka Arellano, I wanted to make sure I got the last name correct, who is a HR consultant focused on med tech companies. She found that in a lot of the times when she's working with those med tech companies, that a lot of the HR work is still done on paper. Can you believe it, in the era of AI? And so she said, okay, I'm going to prompt. Everything you're seeing on the screen is literally her recording how she built it. Just a person that 3 weeks ago didn't really do much beyond just prompting an AI. She said, okay, I'm going to build a system. And so she prompted an entire working system where she can build org charts, where she can do all the things that you would normally do in a digital HR system, just created from a prompt. And obviously, she spent quite a bit more time. So another really big difference between kind of using AI above the service or using it kind of like as a beginner stages, just kind of like the most common use cases, to really letting AI execute the work. Okay, I kept to the 45 minutes, so that's good. We'll definitely look at some of the questions, but this is really everything that I would do. Again, if you're kind of feeling like you're at this curiosity stage where you're using it every now and then, you're using it pretty service level, pretty generically, mostly for productivity, mostly kind of the platform as it is, and mostly the you doing the work, you prompting it, right? Again, start to shift towards this AI leadership side where you're treating it as a new colleague, where you're using it on all of the work that typically AI is very good at, to do things not only that you were doing before, but also things that you want to do where AI can really help you, and start to then really customize it, right? Really personalize it by building those GPTs or building those gems or agents. And then maybe even picking up the agentic tools. Now, I would say that last part is kind of optional, but the first four, I think if you want to be competitive in the marketplace today, that's really where you need to be. We have, as I mentioned, like we do all of this in this bootcamp. Obviously, you can do it on your own too. That's totally fine. We do have another bootcamp kicking off on Friday. Con from the team will spam the link in the chat box to purchase a ticket if you haven't. I saw Sjoerd is here, but if you haven't purchased a ticket and you want to join, you basically want to have a group of people that work with you, like it's really small groups that work with you to build your first 5 assistants and to really learn AI by doing, so that you walk away as an AI leader. Just click on that link and check out. This is the entire program that we're going through. Again, we're going through a lot of frameworks, we're going through a lot of tools, but again, the focus is on you building your AI team so that you really walk away practically as someone who is now capable of using AI as a new way to work and lead. And then to make it attractive, we have a bunch of offers here as well. Okay, with that said, I'm going to go scroll through the questions. And if there are people who want to unmute and ask their question, then I'm happy to kind of answer in real time. And obviously, this is the point where you're totally free to drop off. We will send the slides, we will send the recording, we will send this discount link if you want to join on Friday for the next 3 weeks to workshop AI with me. But yeah, at this point, you're totally free to drop off. And then in the meantime, I'll go through some of the questions for those who like an answer. And the very first question is from Mr. Will on struggling to create a custom GPT project or agent. Will, do you want to unmute and share what your struggles is? Maybe we can all learn something from that.
Hey, good morning. Hope you can
Hey.
hear me. Hey, man. Yeah, I'm just some, as you said in the beginning, I was happy to be able to finally make my custom GPT. But then I learned that was this a cap of 20 documents that I could upload in it.
That is
And I
true,
thought,
yes.
right, or I thought, nah, that's not really what I want. So I then went to projects, which is, the project mode, which is which I will use most and I like most because you can endlessly go on and on and on and update new news.
Yeah.
So that's great. And then we got the agents and I'm just struggling. So I'm using ChatGPT every day now, and I'm just sometimes struggling though what mode to use. So do I create a custom GPT for this task, or do I use a project, or do I need to make an agent? And then that's what I struggle with most. It
And
used to
you're
be that all the types of models that GPT had, like 3 and 4 and 3 1 plus 1, but that's now made easier for non-tech people like myself. But now I'm
somewhat easier,
struggling
yes,
with,
yes.
but now I'm struggling with, when should I use a custom GPT and when an agent and when a project?
Okay, perfect question, because I'm sure that there's at least 5 other people who have the same question because they're not making it much easier. So basically, GPT and projects are very similar. And I would say that almost always a project is the better thing to create, mostly because projects, basically, they look like folders where all of the chats with that project are all grouped together. They still have the custom instruction and the documentation, or kind of like the background, right? The grounding that you have in GPTs as well. But as a bonus, it has a specialized memory across all of those chats. So now when you open up a new chat or you continue a conversation in one of the chats that you have under that project, it remembers everything from across that project. So if you have a project, let's say we have one for like writing our weekly newsletters, it then knows all of the past newsletters. So sort of it has prioritized knowledge above and beyond what ChatGPT generally knows, and even what it knows about you. So it's kind of like talking to the team leader of a couple of writers for your newsletter. So I would almost always use the project, except for projects are not shareable, not even within your company. So if it is something where other people need to have access, then you have to go back to a GPT. And a GPT, it depends on the plan that you're on, but you can either share that, you can keep it completely private, that's the standard setting, but you can share it to, for example, just your team. You can share it to your entire company, or you can share it even externally, and you can even publish it into the GPT App Store if you want to become not rich, unfortunately, because they still haven't monetized it, but at least famous. Then you would use a GPT, and then so I hope that helps in kind of like distinguishing those two.
Yeah.
Then in terms of agentic, that's like a whole other layer, and I would say that I have yet to see extremely good use cases of agents, just to be honest. I think it's like very early stage of that technology. And of course, it's great. It looks really interesting. It looks really cool that the AI can open up a website and browse through it. But there was a great article on Wired where they tested it, and it took like 58 minutes to order one cupcake. In terms of actual practical application,
Yeah.
so
All right.
so.
Yeah. Okay. 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 That's clear.
Yeah. Okay.
All right.
Very
Thank you
good.
so much. Thank
Yeah.
you.
No. All good. And I saw Jacob also had a question about GPTs. Adrian, adapting to changes in GPT models. Okay, we should talk about the models. I know this is kind of Adrian. Do you wanna unmute and share? I know this is a big thing over the past week and a half. We've barely recovered. If not, I will read your question. You can always jump in. So Adrian is saying, adapting to changes in GPT models, learning how to use the new models effectively after getting used to 4.1, 4.5, and o3. So originally, life was very simple. November 2022, ChatGPT launches. We have ChatGPT 3.5. Great, we have ChatGPT 3.5. That's it. Then they started launching all of these other models, and after 4.0, they launched all kinds of specialist models. So 4.1 that Adrian mentioned was really good at writing. It was really good at coding and at very diligently reading documents. That's where I used it most. 4.5 was a higher EQ model, so it was really good at writing. Then you had O3 and O1, which were really good at reasoning and thinking. And then they were trying to make it quote unquote simpler by putting everything into one model. But we saw some backlash, and it actually is getting a bit more complicated. Now, there's basically two answers to your question or your comment. Number one is that if you're on the plus plan or above, you can bring back at least 4.0. So if you go into your settings, there's a toggle called access legacy models. They keep changing the language, access legacy models. When you switch that on, you now see 4.0 back in your model picker. And if you're on the team plan or above, so team, pro, or enterprise, you also have all of the other models. So I can now again access 4.1, 4.5, 03, 01, 01 Pro. They're all back for me. The other side of it is that basically you just kind of have to think about the standard 5 mode as kind of a version that kind of embeds both 4.1 and 4.5. But this basically goes back to this point of the model being very steerable. So yes, you now have one singular model. So the confusion of which model to choose is gone. But now you have to be very specific and basically sort of like let ChatGPT 5 channel its 4.1 or channel its 4.5 character. So you have to prompt it much more specifically. So if you want it to be more like 4.1, because it is optimized for coding, you have to say, I want you to read very diligently. I want you to spend at least 2 minutes on this particular task, doing it in this particular way. So you have to be much more prescriptive to still get the same output, where previously just selecting the model was the shortcut to get there. And for O3, you can just select 5 thinking, it's called 5 thinking. Or if you're on team plan or above, you can choose 5 thinking pro, which is really good, but you run out of credits very quickly. And now OpenAI is bribing me to put more money into my account. Okay, I see some other some other challenges here. Keeping up, yes, that's a challenge even for us with 3 people full-time researching, tapping into the potential. Okay, I see here Alvaro has actually a suggestion, even better than a question. Alvaro, you want to share? Creating GPT as an AI advisor.
Sorry, I was on mute. Yeah, I think
No
that
problem.
what I found like again going to keep up, but to really at some point I started to use it, and I said this has to give more than just productivity, right? It has to be just about doing things faster. So after talking with some clients, we kind of like say, why don't we do a workshop where we list, and I think you suggested like either your agenda or the things that you do, and we did it with, with a small company that my brother runs. Say, okay, let's list all the departments, all the functionalities, and let's ask, an AI assistant or coach and say, what can we do faster? What can we do better? And what actually can we do new? And it was amazing because it's giving us a roadmap of, okay, with the current tools, which we use Google mostly, with the current tools, you can do these things faster and better. If you upgrade to these tools, then you can do new things. And because we already, it's a interactive digital company, because we already are used to work in sprints. Now, every 2 sprints, there's like an AI, let's say, experiment, right? So every 2 weeks, somebody says, okay, I have used this tool to improve the proposals to clients, or we are using this to come up with images for for mockups or whatever. And it's really helpful because it grounds things and kind of like you get rid of that sense of anxiety of where do I start.
Exactly.
Now,
Yes.
the matrix that we have created is huge. Like it would take
sure.
years to complete all of that. But now every department lead has to provide experiment every 2 weeks and just share with somebody else. And I think that's what really has kind of like accelerated things. The experimentation, the sharing, the knowing that yes, maybe there's a roadmap, but we start with small. So, I mean, I think that has also helped me to focus more versus continue to just constantly exploring what's the new thing, saying, why don't I make the most of the things that I know and the ones that we are already doing, instead of finding what's the next shiny thing.
Yeah, it's kind of to our topic of going beyond the service. Like, I don't think it's about really going wider. I think it's going deeper. And it's so, like, I would really advise everyone. I think it's so tempting. And again, we're in the business, so I get it. It's so tempting to chase the shiny new thing, to suddenly spend the whole weekend in AI video generation. Again, if that's part of what you need to do, it's totally fine if it's part of what you want to do. But 99% of the time, you're going to get way more out of AI if you just get better at prompting ChatGPT. I'm showing a bunch of stuff today just because I know it speaks to kind of like the imagination. But the truth is, the real value of AI is just you get way more out of it if you just get better at prompting and understand the tools. Even within ChatGPT, our last webinar, we did a deep dive on over 20 plus features just in the ChatGPT platform. And just mastering all of those and getting everything out of it, as we were just talking with Will about, like projects versus GPTs, for example. So yeah, I can tell that you're in the innovation space, right? because you understand, right? Like that's always the risk. I see here Diane's question about, is it worth getting the pro membership on GPT-5? I have a very simple test on whether or not it's worth it. If you're getting notifications from ChatGPT that you've run out of credits, it's worth upgrading to Pro. If you're not, you're probably good. The ChatGPT 5 Pro model, it's a bit confusing because they have a Pro membership and a Pro model. The Pro model is really, really, really good, but I think for most people, probably not necessary. It's sort of like you already have a PhD level thinker in your pocket. Do you really need someone who's even better? So probably for that alone, it's not worth it. But if you're running into your limits because you're constantly doing agent tasks, or you're constantly using deep research, for example, then it can be worth it to upgrade. Now, unfortunately, any advice I give on ChatGPT could be outdated by tomorrow. But for now, one tip I could give is what we did is basically upgrade to the team plan. And at least as of now, the team plan is only $30 per user per month, whereas Pro is $200. On the team plan, you get all the benefits you get slightly lower usage limits, but you get all of the benefits of the Pro plan, including the Pro model. You get access to all the legacy models, so I can use my 4.1, 4.5, etc. So team plan is a good bet, but who knows what that looks like tomorrow. Are custom GPTs public? Yes, it's private by default, but I see a lot of people sharing GPTs. I'm seeing people share chats, right? Because there's a share link on your chats. I see people, you can now in ChatGPT, you can vibe code in Canvas. You can just give it a prompt and build a web app kind of similar to Lovable. Then people share that. Your prompt, everything that you put into that app, everything you put into the chat becomes public. And therefore, Google can index it. Anyone can have access to it. So be careful with that. Jacob, you want to ask your question? Oh, sorry. I should first check if Jacob didn't. Yes, leave. Okay. Well, Jacob was asking probably in reply to the final demo that we showed, where someone vibe coded an HRIS. This is sensitive HR data. What guarantees are there from Lovable that it does not leak? Yes, that's where I would be extremely careful. And that's again where it's great that now these tools can help you to code better, right? Expanding your capability. But for most people, the outcome of that would be that you're now able to visualize or mock up something that then someone else is actually going to build, unless you want to dive very deep into it. And there are people in our community like Anastasia, for example, who built an entire interactive website with it. But then you also have to take on the other part of the role of a developer in terms of your cybersecurity, in terms of your data confidentiality, etc. So it's very, very important. Zile is asking, are we going to get the slides? Yeah, I thought I mentioned that. Yes. Jael, you have the closing question / comments. 2026. Tell us, what does it look like next year?
Yeah, pina coladas at the beach so that we can let the AI do all the stuff that we're doing. Yay.
Perfect. Okay. So with that message from JL, I'll scroll through the rest. I'll reply to them offline since we couldn't get through it in the session. With that beautiful picture in our minds of being on the beach, drinking pina colada because AI is doing all the work next year, I will leave you today. Again, slides are coming to you, recording is coming to you, discount link is coming to you. And then I know some of you here, I will see you on Friday when we actually kick off the next bootcamp, which is very exciting and otherwise in our great community. All right, thanks everyone for joining, and shout out to the team for helping me prepare. See you again soon. Bye-bye. Oh, Alvaro, I like all the thumbs up. Very good. All right, bye everyone.